Hi guys, my name's Genevieve Stickney and I'm going to be doing Skinner's Chapter 10, The Inner World of Motivation and Emotion. I am part of Group 4. This chapter talks a lot about the situation in which behavior occurs, the behavior itself, and the consequence. So what we think about prior to behavior, what we're doing during it, and then the consequence and what happens after we've finished. Needs are feelings find satisfaction or expression through action upon external environment, which is also observed as operant reinforcement in Skinner's chapter. Personalities are patterns of enduring, distinctive with thoughts, emotions, and behavior. Skinner characterizes this in how an individual adapts to the world. It shows how techniques become cognitive strategies, almost. He talks about the environment being used for experiences, and the action you're doing moves into the ideas, which comes with purposes and will. Thinking and perform the background for memories. Skinner wrote that a paper on the activist youth of 1960s talks about modal personality, which basically describes what the younger population does in front of teachers and parents. Analysis of the modal activist is not the modal personality. Your own personality is the resource for your own behavior by the set of contingencies in front of you. The behavior of what you're surrounded by contributes to how you act now. So, for instance, the behavior of how me being Catholic is different from the behavior of another religion, like being Jewish. This is an example of how different families have contingencies that prove to show different behavior. These contingencies can conflict when it comes around the holidays, in which I would celebrate Christmas, but someone else who is Jewish would celebrate Hanukkah. Skinner says that genetic genes have no effect on someone until it is exposed to the environment. So when you are born, Skinner says that once that person is exposed to the environment and the way they behave is what proves to show who they are. In Freud's terms, their power, using id, ego, and superego. Id consists of unconscious drives, talks about sexual energy, works according to pleasure principle. Ego deals with demands of reality, abides by the reality principle. Superego evaluates morality of behavior, and it's reflected on conscious. The superego and the id show similar patterns. The social contingencies of reinforcement is found by different cultures within each family. So Skinner used a different example in the book, but I'm going to use an example of something in my own life. If you were to sit as a family for dinner, which is something you have done since you were born, those are the contingencies that define you as a family, rather than the contingencies of another family who has a schedule that's more hectic and their family was never required to eat as a family. The next section is life in the psyche. Skinner talks about how the mind has different parts which exhibits our behavior. You can have one problem and there could be two ways in which you behave to it. For example, I have a test in a week. I can make flashcards or I can do practice tests. Those are two different behaviors that I have that could solve the problem to my test. Skinner talks about how different behavior put in different parts of the mind. He uses the music reference as an example in the book. Examples of motivation and emotion are frustration in which you feel powerless. Skinner explained that weakened faith leads to anxiety or depression, which disrupts your thought process. This explains to why the feelings we feel move towards another feeling, which distributes our behavior. For example, being nervous about making this video turns into stress, which turns into anxiety. Skinner says that frustration is generated by extinction, which is also responsible for the aggressive behavior. The controlling measures used by an authority make it more likely that a person escapes or counteracts, and relevant conditions may be felt as resentment, which shows compliant behavior. So, for example, I said if someone went to jail, having authorities around them may increase an inmate want to escape. But in another behavior, it may cause an inmate to be more compliant in order to get out quicker. The next section is defense mechanisms. Skinner used 3 examples of defense mechanisms, which are explained in tactics used to reduce anxiety by unconsciously distorting reality. One being repression, which pushes an unacceptable id impulse back into the unconscious mind. This is also the foundation of all psychological defense mechanisms. An example of repression is explained in terms of how you feel or what you want can't be expressed. The pressure builds up until the explosion occurs. So if you feel anxious and you can't express how you feel, you might get even more anxious where you blow up. Conversion was the second example, which shows symptoms occurring because of psychological conflict. This does not demonstrate mind over matter, which Skinner made sure of. Conversion shows that physical conditions have an effect on your behavior. The last one is sublimation, which transforms unconscious impulses into beneficial activities. So, for example, if you have 2 forms of behavior which are both reinforced, and if only one of them is punished, the other one is more likely to occur. So I use the example of yelling for my mom. I can either yell mom or I can either yell Chev, and I only get a response when I yell Chev, then I'm more likely to use that reinforcer than the other. The inner cause. It talks about the uncontrolled parts of the environment that change our outlook. Skinner talks about how when someone gets angry, that the behavior and the parallel contingencies cause that person to feel angry. A person who is angry and who doesn't know why may just say, I don't know, just angry, which is hard to explain. But we should be able to look for the sources of our mood. The inner causes talked about the feelings that occur when we feel happy, sad, excited, etc. Certain circumstances produce us to have those feelings. For example, I feel sad because I got a bad grade on my test. I feel happy because I got a good grade on my test. The next part is why look inside. This section of Skinner's reading talks about the internalization of intellect and is fully matched. In terms to this, it explains that due to our contingencies, we act a certain way. This is what we consider a behavioral parallel. For example, if we got into a car accident going 80, you may now drive at 40 because of the punishing consequences. He may now drive more cautious. Skinner explains that people exhibit themselves the way they do because of past contingencies. For example, someone may move at a different pace now because of contingencies such as maybe someone who's prone to falling. They may walk at a slower pace because of their history of punishing consequences. When a group of people have power, Skinner also talks about when a group of people may have power, they speak about their good qualities, which contradict what other negative comments have been said about them, maybe prior. People feel the shame of what others say about them, but they act in a more powerful way because of the environment they're in. So people don't speak of themselves because of the anarchy. They speak well of themselves because it's reinforcing to hear themselves talk highly of themselves. The uselessness of inner causes. The mind that stood in the way of more important things, Skinner uses the example of mind kills, not guns, which is now a more sensitive topic than when the book was written, but it is an appropriate way to evaluate the mind and how it works. He also talks about throughout the book how we need to know how more of the different contingencies of reinforcements. This was a pretty hard chapter, so I hope you guys understood it. My 2 questions are, which part of the chapter intrigued you the most, why or why not, and what past contingencies have changed your behavior from then till now? See ya!